The morning sun cast long shadows across Sweetwater Creek. As Serena Palmer stared at the closed door of the general store, her rejection still ringing in her ears. "We don't serve your kind here," the shopkeeper had said, his voice dripping with disdain as whispers of her past spread through town like wildfire. It was 1876, and in the unforgiving landscape of the Wyoming territory, second chances were as rare as rain in August. Serena clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as the early autumn wind picked up, sending dust swirling around her boots. At 24, her face still held youthful beauty, though her hazel eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen more hardship than most twice her age. Her auburn hair, neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet, caught the sunlight as she turned away from the storefront. "Seems mighty peculiar that a paying customer gets turned away in a town desperate for business," a deep voice remarked from behind her. Serena turned to find a tall man leaning against a hitching post, his worn leather vest and dusty Stetson marking him as one of the local ranch hands. His face, partially shadowed by his hat, bore the weathered lines of someone who spent his days under the harsh western sun. "You must be new to Sweetwater," she replied, her voice steady despite her humiliation. "Otherwise, you'd know exactly why Mr. Hamilton won't sell to me." The stranger pushed his hat back, revealing piercing blue eyes and a square jawline softened by a few days' growth of beard. "Name's Grant Xavier, foreman at the Broken Spoke Ranch." He extended a calloused hand, "and I make a point of forming my own opinions about folks." Serena hesitated before briefly accepting his handshake. "Serena Palmer. And my opinion is that you'd best keep your distance if you value your reputation in this town." Grant's mouth quirked into a half smile. "Fortunate thing about being 6'3" and handy with both fists and firearms, folks tend to keep their opinions to themselves when I'm around." He glanced at the list clutched in her hand. "What were you needing from old Hamilton's store?" "Nothing I can't do without," she answered quickly, tucking the list into her pocket. "Nonsense." Grant pushed off from the post. "I've got some purchasing to do myself." "Give me your list and I'll get what you need." Serena stiffened. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Xavier. Not offering any, Miss Palmer. Consider it neighborly assistance." His eyes held her steadily. "And you can repay me by telling me where to find a decent meal in this town." Ranch cooks got a heavy hand with the salt and a strange fondness for beans. Despite herself, Serena felt a smile tug at her lips. "Mrs. Wilson's boarding house serves supper at 6. It's simple fare, but it won't leave you reaching for the water bucket all night." "Sounds like heaven compared to Cookie's offerings." Grant nodded toward the list in her pocket. "Now, about those supplies." Reluctantly, Serena handed over her list. "I can pay," she insisted, reaching for her coin purse. "We'll settle accounts after," he said, already striding toward the store. "Wait here." Serena watched as he disappeared inside, aware of curious glances from passers-by. A woman of her reputation shouldn't be conversing with respectable men in broad daylight. That was the unspoken rule in Sweetwater. Yet here she was, accepting help from a stranger who seemed utterly unconcerned with town gossip. 10 minutes later, Grant emerged with a canvas sack of supplies. "Got everything on your list, plus a few extras Hamilton was eager to part with once I mentioned they were for the ranch." "You lied for me?" Serena asked, troubled. "Not precisely. These items are indeed heading to a location in the general vicinity of the Broken Spoke." He handed her the sack. "Which, if I recall correctly from town gossip, is not far from your homestead." Serena accepted the supplies, her brow furrowed. "How did you small town? Word travels." Grant adjusted his hat against the sun. "They say you're trying to work that old Palmer claimed single-handed. That true?" "It was my father's land," she said defensively. "I intend to make it profitable again." "Admirable goal." Grant's expression remained neutral, though his eyes held a spark of interest. "Difficult for anyone, let alone a woman alone," Serena finished, her chin lifting slightly. "I was going to say anyone without sufficient help, but have it your way." He smiled, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "Speaking of which, I might have some hands who could spare a day or two for repairs if you're amenable." Serena's pride warred with practicality. The cabin roof leaked in 3 places, and winter would arrive before she knew it. Still, accepting help meant owing favors, and in her experience, men's favors always came with expectations. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Xavier, but Grant," he corrected. "And before you refuse, consider that I owe Hank Palmer a debt. He gave me my first job in these parts when no one else would hire a green Easterner with more book learning than horse sense." Serena's expression softened at the mention of her father. "You knew my father?" "I did. Good man. Fair to everyone who worked honest." Grant's voice carried genuine respect. "Helping his daughter get that place back on its feet seems a fitting way to honor his memory." Serena studied the foreman carefully, looking for signs of deceit. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Perhaps I could accept some assistance with the roof, and the well needs attention." "I'll ride out tomorrow with a couple of reliable men," Grant said, checking the position of the sun. "Now, I've got ranch business to attend to, but I believe I've earned that dinner recommendation. Mrs. Wilson's, 6 o'clock, Serena reminded him, gathering her supplies. "Though I should warn you, she's as fond of gossip as she is of her apple pie." "Then I'll enjoy both in moderation," Grant replied with a wink. "Until tomorrow, Miss Palmer." As he mounted his horse and rode out of town, Serena found herself watching him longer than propriety dictated. There was something different about Grant Xavier, a straightforwardness that contrasted sharply with the sidelong glances and whispered judgments she'd grown accustomed to. Still, she reminded herself as she began the long walk home, one act of kindness didn't change the reality of her situation. In a town that remembered only her mistakes, Grant would soon learn why decent folk kept their distance from Serena Palmer. The following morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of warmth as the sun climbed higher. Serena rose before first light, as had been her habit since childhood. The small cabin, which had once housed her family of 5, now echoed with emptiness around her solitary figure. She kindled the stove and put coffee on to boil, then set about her morning chores. The 2 milk cows needed tending, chickens needed feeding, and there was bread to bake before the day grew too warm for firing the oven. By the time she heard hoofbeats in the distance, she had already accomplished more than most people did in half a day. 3 riders approached, Grant's tall figure easily distinguishable between 2 younger men. They dismounted at the edge of her yard, removing their hats as Serena emerged onto the porch. "Morning, Miss Palmer," Grant called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Hope we're not too early for you." "I've been up for hours, Mr. Xavier," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Coffee's hot if you men are interested." The younger cowboys glanced at each other, clearly uncertain about the propriety of accepting hospitality from her. Grant, however, showed no such hesitation. "Much obliged." "Allow me to introduce Luke Thompson and Ellie Daniels, 2 of the best hands at broken spoke. Boys, this is Miss Serena Palmer." The men nodded respectfully, though their discomfort was evident. Serena was used to this reaction young men who'd heard the stories but weren't quite sure how to reconcile them with the modestly dressed woman before them. "Come on in then," she said, holding the door. "You can tell me what materials you'll need for the repairs." Inside the cabin, the men sat awkwardly at her small table while Serena poured coffee into mismatched cups. The interior was clean but Spartan, with few feminine touches beyond a faded quilt draped across the back of a rocking chair. "I've got some tools and lumber in the wagon," Grant said, warming his hands around the coffee cup. "Thought we'd start with that roof before the weather turns." Serena nodded. "The northeast corner leaks worst, and I've been hauling water from the creek since July when the well stopped producing." "Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us," Grant replied, unfazed. "Illy here is handy with wells, and Luke can frame faster than most carpenters I've known." Both young men straightened slightly at the praise, their initial wariness beginning to fade. "I'll prepare dinner for you all," Serena offered. "It's the least I can do in exchange for your help." "That's mighty kind," Luke said, finding his voice at last. "We brought provisions, but a home-cooked meal beats trail food any day." Grant drained his coffee and stood. "We'd best get started if we want to make real progress today." The men moved outside, and soon the rhythmic sound of hammers and male voices filled the air around the cabin. Serena continued her own work tending the garden, preparing food, and mending clothes while keeping a cautious eye on the unexpected help. By midday, the northeastern section of the roof had been completely replaced, and Ellie was examining the well with serious concentration. Serena called them in for the promised meal: rabbit stew, fresh bread, and the season's last green beans from her garden. The men washed up at the outdoor pump and filed in, their initial awkwardness now replaced by the easy camaraderie of shared labor. "This is the finest bread I've had since leaving my mother's house in Ohio," Ellie declared, already on his second slice. "Miss Palmer could give Mrs. Wilson lessons," Grant agreed, his eyes meeting Serena's with appreciation that went beyond the quality of the food. "My mother taught all her daughters to cook," Serena said, uncomfortable with the praise. "Said a woman needs useful skills more than she needs beauty." "Seems to me you got both in abundance," Luke remarked, then immediately reddened when he realized what he'd said. "Begging your pardon, Miss Palmer." Serena gave him a small smile. "No offense taken, Mr. Thompson." As the meal continued, conversation flowed more naturally. The men spoke of ranch matters, local news, and the coming winter. Not once did they allude to the rumors that had made Serena an outcast in Sweetwater, though she knew they must have heard them. After the meal, they returned to work with renewed vigor. By sunset, the roof was completely repaired, and Ellie had identified the problem with the well, a collapsed section that would require another day's work to fix properly. "We'll come back tomorrow to finish," Grant announced as they prepared to leave. "That well needs proper attention before the ground freezes." "I've imposed enough on your generosity," Serena protested. "It's not an imposition when it's freely given," Grant replied firmly. "Besides, I promised Hank Palmer I'd look after things if he ever couldn't, and I aim to keep my word." Serena's eyes widened slightly. "You never mentioned that before." Grant adjusted his hat, suddenly seeming less comfortable. "Didn't seem necessary to bring up. Your father helped a lot of people around here, including me. This is just settling accounts." After the men departed, Serena sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Her father had been gone 3 years now, taken by the same fever that claimed her mother and younger brother within a terrible 2-week span. Her older sister had married and moved to California soon after, leaving Serena alone on the struggling homestead. What followed had been the darkest period of her life, one that culminated in choices that Sweetwater could neither understand nor forgive. That Grant Xavier knew her father well enough to make promises to him was unexpected information, one that stirred both curiosity and caution in her heart. True to his word, Grant returned the next day with the same 2 hands plus an older man introduced as Miguel, who apparently had particular expertise with wells. By mid-afternoon, fresh water was flowing again, and Miguel had built a better cover to protect it through the winter. While the younger men loaded tools back into the wagon, Grant approached Serena where she stood hanging laundry. "Place is looking better already," he observed, hands resting on his belt, "but there's still plenty needs doing before winter." "I'm grateful for what you've accomplished," Serena said, pinning a shirt to the line. "It's more than I could have managed alone." Grant cleared his throat. "I've been thinking. Broken Spoke could use some fresh bread and proper cooking now and again. Our cook's better with horses than biscuits, truth be told." Serena paused, a damp sheet in her hands. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Xavier?" "A fair exchange. You bake bread and pies for the ranch twice weekly, and I'll send men over to help with the heavy work your place needs." His expression remained businesslike. "Going rate for baked goods in town plus whatever vegetables your garden produces will pay market price." Serena studied him suspiciously. "Why would you do this?" "Because 20 hungry cowboys would trample each other for a taste of that bread you made yesterday," Grant replied with a slight smile. "And because you've got grit, Miss Palmer, I respect that." "Even knowing what they say about me in town," she challenged, Grant's expression sobered. "I know what they say. I also know there's usually more to any story than what gossips share over fence posts." Serena turned back to her laundry, emotions warring within her. The arrangement would provide much-needed income and assistance, but it also meant regular interaction with the ranch with Grant, and that carried its own risks. "I'll consider it," she finally said, not looking at him. "Fair enough." Grant tipped his hat. "I'll check back in a few days." "Before I go, is there anything else pressing that needs attention?" Serena hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "The barn door's hanging by one hinge. I've been propping it with a log, but it won't hold against winter winds." Within an hour, the door was properly rehung, and the men departed with promises to return soon. Standing in her dooryard as evening approached, Serena felt an unfamiliar emotion stirring beneath her caution and Independence hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Serena settled into a new routine. Twice weekly, she baked 6 loaves of bread, 2 pies, and whatever else struck her fancy for the Broken Spoke Ranch. A young ranch hand named Jamie would arrive precisely at noon to collect the goods and deliver payment, along with occasional supplies Grant sent along coffee, sugar, or lamp oil. In return, various ranch hands appeared regularly to help with tasks around her homestead. The barn was reinforced, firewood was chopped and stacked in quantities that would see her through the winter, and the garden was properly prepared for spring planting. Grant himself came at least once a week, overseeing the work and often staying to share a meal afterward. Despite her initial reservations, Serena found herself looking forward to these visits. Grant never pressed her about her past or treated her with anything less than respect. Their conversations ranged from practical matters of the homestead to books they'd read and places they'd seen. He was educated surprising for a ranch foreman, and spoke of years spent at a university back east before the call of open country proved too strong to resist. On a crisp October afternoon, Grant arrived alone, leading a second horse beside his own. "Thought you might like to see some country beyond this homestead," he called as Serena emerged from the cabin. "Perfect day for a ride." Serena wiped flour-covered hands on her apron, surprised by the invitation. "I have bread rising. It'll keep another hour," Grant countered. "When's the last time you rode just for the pleasure of it?" The truth was, Serena couldn't remember. Every trip to town was for necessities, every moment of her days dedicated to survival. The idea of riding simply for enjoyment seemed almost foreign. "I don't have proper riding clothes," she protested weakly. Grant's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Pretty sure the horse won't mind." 20 minutes later, they were riding side by side through golden aspen groves, following a game trail that wound up into the foothills. The mare Grant had brought for her was gentle but spirited, and Serena found herself remembering the joy of horseback, riding something she'd loved as a girl, but had abandoned along with other pleasures in recent years. "There's a view up ahead worth seeing," Grant said, guiding his horse around a rocky outcropping. They emerged onto a small plateau overlooking the valley below. The homestead looked tiny from this height, nestled among the changing colors of autumn. Beyond it lay the sprawling Broken Spoke Ranch, and further still, the small cluster of buildings that was Sweetwater. "I found this spot my first month working for your father," Grant said, dismounting and tying his horse to a scrub oak. "Used to ride up here to think when things got too crowded down below." Serena slid from her saddle, accepting Grant's steadying hand. "It's beautiful." "Helps put things in perspective," he agreed, gesturing toward the vast landscape. "From up here, the problems down there seem manageable." They sat on sun-warmed rocks, a respectful distance between them, gazing out at the panorama. The air was clear and sharp with the scent of pine, the sun warm against the autumn chill. "Why did you really help me, Mr. Xavier?" Serena asked suddenly. "And don't say it was just because of a promise to my father." Grant was quiet for a long moment, turning his hat in his hands. "When I came west, I was running from some mistakes of my own," he finally said. "Your father hired me when others wouldn't. Never asked what I was running from, just whether I could work hard and keep my word." He looked at her directly. "I figured his daughter deserved the same consideration." "The difference is, everyone knows what I did," Serena said softly. "They know pieces, parts that make for good gossip." Grant's voice held no judgment. "I've found that people's stories are usually more complicated than town talk would have you believe." Serena plucked a stem of dried grass, twisting it between her fingers. "3 years ago, after my family died, I was lost. The bank was threatening to take our land for unpaid taxes. I had no skills that would earn enough to save it." She paused, the memories still painful. Samuel Blackwood offered a solution. Marriage would save the homestead, he said. He was wealthy, respected in town, 45 to my 21. Grant remained silent, his face impassive. "I agreed, not from love but desperation," Serena continued. "The engagement was announced, preparations made, then I discovered his true nature." Her voice hardened. "He'd already discarded 2 wives, one dead under suspicious circumstances, one committed to an asylum back east. His household staff bore bruises they couldn't explain." "You broke the engagement," Grant surmised. Serena nodded. "Publicly, at a dinner held in our honor. I called him what he was, a cruel man who hid behind wealth and position. I imagine that wasn't well received. Blackwood had influence, friends in high places. When I refused to recant, he spread stories about me, claimed I'd been improper with him before marriage, then had the audacity to act virtuous." Her laugh was bitter. "The town chose to believe him. Why wouldn't they? He donated the church bells, funded the school. And no one stood by you." Grant asked quietly. "My sister was already gone. Father's old friends tried, but one by one they yielded to pressure. Business relationships, social connections, all tied to Blackwood's good opinion." Serena tossed the grass stem away. "Even when he left town 6 months later, the damage was done. I was branded unmarriageable, untrustworthy." Grant was silent for a long moment. "Yet you stayed. This land is all I have left of my family," she said simply. "I won't be driven from it by lies." The setting sun cast long shadows across the plateau. Grant stood, offering his hand to help her up. "We should head back before dark." As they rode down the trail, Grant finally spoke again. "Blackwood's name is known beyond Sweetwater, not favorably in certain circles." "What do you mean?" "Let's just say your assessment of his character has been echoed by others." Grant adjusted his hat against the lowering sun. "He left quite a trail of destruction before settling here, and apparently after leaving as well." Serena processed this information as they approached her cabin. The knowledge that others had seen through Blackwood's facade was small comfort after years of ostracism. At her door, Grant helped her dismount, his hands lingering respectfully at her waist for just a moment. "Thank you for sharing your story," he said. "It couldn't have been easy." "Why does it matter to you?" Serena asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Grant's blue eyes held her steadily. "Because people deserve to be judged by who they are, not by rumors or past mistakes. I learned that from your father." As he mounted to leave, Serena called after him. "Mr. Xavier Grant, about your business proposal, I accept." His smile was warm in the fading light. "I'll send Jamie for the first delivery day after tomorrow then." As November progressed, Serena's connection to the broken spoke deepened. Her baked goods became legendary among the ranch hands, and her garden's final harvest found eager customers. With the extra income, she was able to purchase supplies that had been luxuries before: new fabric for curtains, better quality flour, even a few books ordered through the mercantile in Sweetwater's neighboring town where her reputation hadn't spread. Grant's visits became a fixture in her weeks, sometimes with ranch hands in tow for larger projects, sometimes alone for what he called consulting sessions, but which increasingly resembled social calls. They would share coffee by her stove, discussing improvements to the homestead or news from town, their conversations flowing easily between practical matters and personal interests. Word spread in Sweetwater about the arrangement between the respectable broken-spoke foreman and the disgraced Palmer woman. Gossip flourished with new life, though few dared to voice it where Grant might hear. When Serena ventured into town for necessary supplies, she noticed a subtle shift, not acceptance, but a wary reassessment, as though her association with Grant Xavier had made her situation more complicated in the town's judgment. One cold afternoon in early December, Grant arrived with a covered wagon rather than on horseback, his expression unusually serious. "Something wrong?" Serena asked, watching him secure the horses. "Not wrong, exactly." Grant pulled back the wagon cover, revealing a beautiful pot-bellied stove. "Your current stove's barely adequate and winter's setting in early this year." This was sitting unused in one of the ranch outbuildings. Serena stared at the stove, then at Grant. "I can't accept this." "You're not accepting anything," Grant countered. "It's a loan." The ranch benefits from keeping its baker warm and productive through winter. His reasoning made practical sense, yet they both knew it was more than a business decision. Grant had noticed her rubbing her hands during his last visit, had commented on the cabin's chill despite the fire. "At least let me pay something for its use," Serena insisted. Grant's expression softened. "If you're determined, you can teach me to make that apple pie of yours. Been thinking about it since October." The installation of the stove took most of the afternoon, with Grant carefully positioning it for maximum heat distribution and safety. When it was finally in place, radiating glorious warmth throughout the small cabin, Serena fulfilled her end of the bargain by demonstrating her pie-making techniques. Standing beside her at the table, watching her hands work the dough, Grant seemed more focused on the cook than the cooking. His closeness made her increasingly flustered until she accidentally dropped the rolling pin. They both reached for it at once, hands colliding. Grant's fingers closed gently around hers, and for a moment they remained frozen in the contact, her smaller hand enveloped in his larger one. "Serena," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. "I didn't come here today just to deliver a stove." She straightened slowly, her hand still in his. "Why did you come then?" "I wanted to ask permission to court you properly." His direct gaze held no artifice, only honest intent. "I've grown to care for you these past months, more than I expected, more than might be wise given how others see our situation." Serena withdrew her hand, stepping back to create distance between them. "You know what they say about me in town." "I do," Grant acknowledged. "And I know it doesn't align with the woman. I've come to know someone brave enough to stand against a powerful man when she discovered his true nature. Someone strong enough to face a town's condemnation rather than live a lie." "A respectable man doesn't court a woman with a ruined reputation," Serena said, the words bitter on her tongue. "I've never been overly concerned with what others consider respectable," Grant replied. "I'm more interested in what's right, what's true." He took a step toward her, careful not to crowd her. "And the truth is, I believe you're a woman worth knowing, worth standing beside, regardless of what anyone in Sweetwater thinks." Serena felt a dangerous hope rising in her chest, one she'd learned to suppress after too many disappointments. "Your position at the ranch is secure," Grant interjected. "The owner values results above gossip, and the hands respect you already whether you realize it or not." "And if I said yes?" Serena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What then?" Grant's expression grew solemn. "Then I'd court you as you deserve, openly, honestly, with intentions that lead toward a shared future, if that's what you come to want." Serena turned away, moving to the window where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her yard. The protective walls she'd built around her heart over years of rejection and solitude felt suddenly vulnerable. "I need time," she finally said. "This is unexpected," Grant nodded, reaching for his hat. "Take all the time you need, my feelings won't change." At the door he paused. "For what it's worth, Serena, I'm not asking despite your past. In many ways, I'm asking because of it. You were rejected for holding to your principles. That's not something to hide, it's something to honor." After he left, Serena sat by the new stove's comforting warmth, her thoughts in turmoil. Grant Xavier represented something she'd given up hoping for, not just companionship, but understanding. The possibility of being truly seen, not through the distorted lens of rumor and judgment, but as herself. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. And she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The next morning brought the first significant snowfall of the season, blanketing the homestead in pristine white. Serena woke to find her world transformed, the familiar landscape rendered new and magical under its winter covering. The snow continued through the day, accumulating steadily until paths needed clearing just to reach the barn. By evening, it was clear this was no ordinary storm, but the kind old-timers spoke of with respect, the sort that isolated homesteads for days or even weeks. As darkness fell, Serena stoked her new stove gratefully, the cabin warmer than it had been in previous winters. She was measuring flour for the next day's baking when a sound outside caught her attention, the muffled approach of horses through deep snow. Grabbing her father's old rifle from above the door, a precaution she never neglected, Serena peered through the frost-edged window. Relief flooded her when she recognized Grant's distinctive silhouette, followed by concern at his unexpected arrival in such weather. She opened the door to find him stamping snow from his boots, his coat and hat covered in white. Behind him, two heavily laden pack horses stood patiently in the swirling snow. "What on earth are you doing out in this?" she demanded, ushering him inside. Grant removed his hat, snow cascading to her floor. "Apologize for the mess. Storm's moving faster than predicted. I was concerned you might not have sufficient supplies." "So you risked freezing to death." Serena took his coat, hanging it near the stove to dry. "Calculated risk," he replied, rubbing his gloved hands together. "Brought extra provisions, some medical supplies, additional feed for your livestock. Storm like this could last a week or more." Serena's irritation faded, replaced by genuine gratitude. "Thank you, that was thoughtful." "Also brought this." Grant reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a parcel wrapped in oilskin. "New book by that author you mentioned. Thought you might like something fresh to read if you're snowed in." The small gesture remembering an offhand comment she'd made weeks ago about enjoying Mark Twain's writing touched Serena more deeply than the practical provisions. It spoke of attention paid, preferences noted, a genuine interest in her happiness beyond mere survival. "We should get the horses sheltered," she said, retrieving her coat. Together they led the animals to her small barn, unloaded the supplies, and ensured all her livestock had access to feed and unfrozen water. By the time they returned to the cabin, the storm had intensified, wind driving snow horizontally across the yard. "You can't possibly ride back tonight," Serena observed, practicality overcoming concerns about propriety. Grant nodded. "I'd hoped to make it before the worst hit, but it came on faster than expected." He looked uncomfortable for the first time since she'd known him. "I can sleep in the barn if you'd prefer, and be found frozen by morning. Don't be ridiculous." Serena gestured to a corner of the cabin. "I'll make up a pallet by the stove." As night deepened and the storm raged outside, they shared a simple meal of stew and bread. The situation alone together in the isolated cabin, snowbound for who knew how long, should have been awkward given his declaration the previous day. Instead, it felt strangely comfortable, as though they'd fallen into a familiar pattern neither had recognized until now. After dinner, Grant insisted on washing the dishes while Serena arranged bedding near the stove. They spoke of practical matters, how long the storm might last, which spring tasks would need attention once the snow melted, whether her chicken coop would hold up under the weight of accumulated snow. When the dishes were done and the hour grew late, Grant settled onto his pallet while Serena took her usual place in the small bed tucked into the cabin's far corner. A privacy screen, one of her first projects after moving back into the cabin alone, separated the sleeping areas. "Good night, Serena," Grant said softly from his side of the screen. "Good night," she replied, listening to the howl of the wind outside and the comforting crackle of the stove. For the first time in years, she felt not just physically safe but emotionally secure in another's presence. Morning revealed a transformed world, snow piled against the cabin walls, drifts reaching halfway up the windows on the windward side. Grant woke before Serena and had coffee brewing by the time she emerged from behind the screen, her hair hastily pinned up. "Storm's still going," he reported, pouring her a cup. "Looks like I may be imposing on your hospitality another day with your permission." "As if you could leave if you wanted to," Serena replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. They established a careful routine over the next 3 days as the storm gradually subsided. Grant handled the outdoor chores, breaking trails to the barn, digging out drifts that threatened doorways, checking the livestock. Serena maintained the cabin, cooked their meals, and continued her baking, teaching Grant additional recipes as promised. They talked more during those snowbound days than in all the previous months combined. Grant spoke of his family back east, parents who had expected him to join his father's law practice, siblings who wrote regularly despite his chosen path. Serena shared memories of her own family, stories she'd kept locked away because they were too painful to recall alone but found healing in the sharing. On the afternoon of the third day, the snow finally stopped. They stood together on the cleared porch, surveying the blindingly white landscape. "Trail should be passable by tomorrow," Grant observed. "I should be able to make it back to the ranch without difficulty." Serena felt a surprising reluctance at the prospect of his departure. The past days had created a bubble of intimacy around them, protected from the judgments and complications of the outside world. Once he left, reality would reassert itself, the reality where she was still Serena Palmer, ruined woman of Sweetwater, and he was Grant Xavier, respected foreman of the territory's largest ranch. "I've been thinking about what you asked," she said suddenly, her eyes on the distant mountains rather than his face. "Before the storm." Grant turned to her, waiting silently for her to continue. "People will talk," she said, "more than they already do. It could affect your standing in the community." "Let them talk," Grant replied simply. "I know my own mind." Serena finally looked at him directly. "If and I'm not saying yes yet, but if we were to court, I need to know one thing. Are you doing this out of some misplaced sense of obligation to my father, or pity for my situation?" "Neither," Grant said firmly. "Though I respected your father greatly, that's not why I'm here, and the last thing you inspire in me is pity, Serena." His voice softened. "What I feel when I'm with you is admiration, interest, a desire to build something meaningful together." Serena searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she took a deep breath. "Then I think I would like to see where this might lead." Slowly, she added. Grant's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "Slowly it is," he agreed, taking her gloved hand in his. "Though I should warn you, once I set my course, I tend to be fairly determined about reaching my destination." The winter of 1876-77 proved to be one of the harshest in Wyoming's memory, with storms following one another in relentless succession. Despite the weather, Grant managed to visit Serena's homestead at least once a week, sometimes staying for several days when conditions made travel dangerous. Their courtship progressed with cautious deliberation on Serena's part and steady patience on Grant's. He brought small gifts, a new pair of wool gloves, seeds for her spring garden, books they could discuss during long winter evenings. She, in turn, began to lower the defensive walls she'd built around her heart, allowing herself to trust his intentions and consistency. Word spread throughout Sweetwater about the developing relationship. Some reactions were predictably negative: matrons who sniffed disapprovingly, men who made crude insinuations when they thought Grant couldn't hear. But there were also unexpected allies. Mrs. Wilson, the boarding house proprietress who had once been among Serena's harshest critics, began to soften her stance after Grant had a long, private conversation with her. The new minister at the church, younger and less entrenched in town politics than his predecessor, made a point of greeting Serena respectfully when their paths crossed. By the time the spring thaw arrived, bringing mud season and the promise of renewal, Serena and Grant's relationship had become an acknowledged fact in the community, if not a universally approved one. What mattered more to Serena was the change within herself, the gradual rekindling of hope and joy that she'd thought permanently extinguished. On a mild April evening, as the first wildflowers began to appear in sheltered spots around the homestead, Grant arrived with 2 fine horses and a picnic basket. "The creek crossing is finally passable," he announced. "Thought we might ride out to that spot we visited in the fall. See how it looks in spring light." The plateau was transformed from their autumn visit, dotted with early flowers, the view below a patchwork of greening fields and lingering snow in shadowed ravines. They spread a blanket on a sun-warmed rock, sharing the meal Grant had brought from the ranch cook's kitchen. "Been thinking," Grant said as they watched an eagle soar in the valley below. "Your homestead's coming along well, but there's only so much two hands can accomplish, even with occasional help from the ranch boys." Serena nodded, unsure where he was heading. "It's more than I could have managed alone." "What if we weren't managing separate properties?" Grant asked carefully. "What if we combined our efforts?" Serena turned to face him fully. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Grant reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I'm suggesting a partnership in all things." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Serena Palmer, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Though she'd begun to suspect his intentions over recent weeks, the actual moment still took her breath away. "Grant, before you answer," he continued earnestly, "know that I'm not asking you to abandon your father's land. We could make our home there, improve it together, or we could build something new if that's what you prefer. The details matter less to me than the fact that we'd face whatever comes as one." "People will say you've lowered yourself," Serena warned, though her heart was racing with hope. "That you could have had any respectable woman in the territory." Grant took her hand, his expression serious. "Let me be perfectly clear about something, Serena. I'm not marrying you despite your past. The strength and integrity you showed in standing against Blackwood is part of why I love you." "You love me?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "With all my heart," Grant confirmed. "And I believe we could build a remarkable future together if you're willing." Serena looked out over the valley that had been her home all her life, the place that held her deepest sorrows, and now, unexpectedly, the promise of joy. "Yes," she said, turning back to him with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, Grant Xavier." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, she added softly, "But I'm not the only one bringing a past to this marriage. Someday you'll have to tell me what brought you west, what you were running from." Grant's smile was tinged with old pain, but his eyes remained steady on hers. "Someday I will. And like you, I found it was better to face the consequences of standing by my principles than to compromise them for an easier path." Their engagement announcement in May caused precisely the stir they had anticipated in Sweetwater. Reactions ranged from genuine congratulations from the ranch hands and newer residents to barely concealed disapproval from the town's established families. Grant weathered the gossip with calm dignity, neither acknowledging the criticism nor hiding his association with Serena. He purchased a marriage license from the county clerk with the same confidence he might show buying supplies, and personally invited the new minister to perform the ceremony. Serena faced her own battles, including an encounter with Mrs. Blackwood, the former town matron who had returned to Sweetwater for a visit just as the engagement became public knowledge. "I hear congratulations are in order," the older woman said coldly, cornering Serena outside the mercantile. "Though I can't imagine what Mr. Xavier is thinking, attaching himself to someone of your history." Serena, who once would have shrunk from such a confrontation, met the woman's gaze steadily. "Mr. Xavier is thinking that he prefers a woman of honest character to one of superficial reputation. As for history, I believe your husband created quite a significant one after leaving Sweetwater." Mrs. Blackwood's face paled slightly. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," Serena replied. "Merely observing that truth has a way of revealing itself eventually. I wish you a pleasant visit to our town, Mrs. Blackwood." As June approached, wedding preparations accelerated. Serena, with surprising support from Mrs. Wilson and several of the ranch wives, sewed a new dress of cream-colored cotton trimmed with lace, simple but elegant. Grant, with help from the ranch hands, began construction on an addition to Serena's cabin, expanding it into a proper home for their future together. 2 weeks before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the homestead. Grant's younger sister, Charlotte, who had traveled from Boston against her parents' wishes after receiving news of the engagement. "They're furious, of course," Charlotte explained over tea in Serena's kitchen. Father still believes Grant will come to his senses and return to law practice. Mother weeps dramatically about her son marrying some Western hoyden, her words, not mine, she added hastily. But I wanted to see for myself what, or rather who, has captured my brother's heart so completely. Charlotte, a forthright young woman of 22 with Grant's same blue eyes and direct manner, sized Serena up with undisguised curiosity. He writes about you, you know, says you're the strongest woman he's ever known. High praise from Grant, who doesn't impress easily. Your brother has been equally remarkable, Serena replied carefully, uncertain of this unexpected ally. He saw beyond what others chose to see. Well, that's Grant for you, Charlotte said, helping herself to another biscuit. Stubborn about seeing things as they are rather than as convention dictates, got him into considerable trouble back home, as you might imagine. He's mentioned there were difficulties, Serena acknowledged, though he's been vague about specifics. Charlotte studied her thoughtfully. Has he not told you about Elizabeth Harrington, then? Serena shook her head and Charlotte sighed. Not my story to tell, I suppose, though you should know it before you marry. Ask him. He'll tell you if you ask directly. When Grant arrived that evening, Charlotte's presence was both a surprise and a delight to him. The siblings embraced warmly, and the evening passed in shared memories and laughter that gave Serena a glimpse into the family Grant had left behind. Later, after Charlotte had retired to the small room that would eventually become part of the expanded house, Serena and Grant sat by the fire. Your sister mentioned someone named Elizabeth Harrington, Serena said quietly. She seemed to think I should know about her before our wedding. Grant's expression grew somber. Charlotte's right, I should have told you before now. He stared into the fire for a long moment. Elizabeth was the daughter of my father's law partner. We were engaged in an arrangement that pleased both families enormously. What happened? Serena prompted when he fell silent. I discovered she was cruel, Grant said simply. Not to me, she was always charming in my presence, but to those she considered beneath her servants, shopgirls, anyone vulnerable. I saw her reduce a young maid to tears over a trivial mistake, then laugh about it afterward. Serena watched his profile, seeing the echo of old pain there. When I confronted her, she was unapologetic, said the girl needed to learn her place. Grant's jaw tightened at the memory. I broke our engagement the next day, publicly, said I couldn't in good conscience marry someone with such disregard for others' dignity. The parallels to my situation with Blackwood aren't lost on me, Serena observed quietly. Grant nodded. When I heard your story, it resonated deeply. But there's more to mine. He turned to face her directly. Elizabeth's father was not just my father's partner, but the most influential man in our social circle. Breaking with Elizabeth meant breaking with everything my father's plans for me, my place in Boston society. When I refused to reconsider, doors began closing. My father gave me an ultimatum: apologize and make amends or leave the family practice. So you left, Serena concluded, came west. With my mother's blessing, though she couldn't say so openly, and what funds she could provide without my father's knowledge. Grant's smile held a touch of irony. I wrote to them regularly, even when they didn't respond. Eventually, Mother began writing back. Father still believes I'll come to my senses one day. Serena reached for his hand. You never told me, it seemed, self-serving somehow, to present myself as someone who'd faced similar rejection. Grant squeezed her fingers gently. But perhaps I should have. So you'd understand that I truly do know something of what you've endured. Charlotte came all this way despite your parents' disapproval, Serena noted. She must love you very much. Charlotte has her own rebellious streak, Grant said fondly, and she's always been my strongest supporter. He studied Serena's face in the firelight. Does knowing this change anything for you? Only in that I understand you better, Serena replied softly, and love you more for it. Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with June sunlight streaming through the homestead's windows. Charlotte helped Serena dress, arranging wildflowers in her hair in place of a formal veil. You look beautiful, Charlotte declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. My brother is a fortunate man. I'm the fortunate one, Serena replied, smoothing her dress nervously. The ceremony took place in the homestead's front yard, where Grant had constructed an arbor covered in climbing roses transplanted from a forgotten corner of the property. The guests were few, but meaningful: the ranch hands who had helped rebuild the homestead, the new minister and his wife, Mrs. Wilson from the boarding house, and several families from outlying farms who had gradually renewed connections with Serena over the winter. As Serena walked toward Grant, who stood waiting beneath the rose-covered arbor, she felt the weight of years of loneliness and rejection lifting. His eyes, fixed on hers with love and certainty, offered not just acceptance but a genuine partnership, one built on mutual respect and shared values. The minister's words were traditional, but when the time came for their vows, Grant departed from the expected text. "Serena," he said, his voice carrying clearly to all present, "I take you as my wife, promising to stand beside you through whatever life brings. Your past has shaped you into the woman I love, and I pledge to help build the future you deserve, one day, one year, one lifetime at a time." Serena, moved beyond her prepared response, spoke from her heart. "Grant, I take you as my husband, grateful for your belief in me when I'd almost stopped believing in myself. I promise to face our future together with the same courage and integrity that brought us to this moment." As they exchanged rings, his a simple gold band that had been his grandfather's, hers the delicate diamond he'd presented during his proposal, Serena felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in the truest sense. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in genuine celebration. The wedding feast, spread on tables in the yard, featured contributions from everyone present: Mrs. Wilson's famous fried chicken, vegetables from Serena's garden, and a magnificent cake Charlotte had somehow arranged to have sent from the finest bakery in Cheyenne. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, Grant found Serena standing slightly apart from their guests, watching the celebration with quiet contentment. "Happy, Mrs. Xavier?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "More than I thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Though I keep expecting to wake and find this was all a dream." "Not a dream," Grant assured her, "just the beginning of our story." From across the yard, Charlotte caught Serena's eye and raised her glass in a private toast. Beside her stood young Luke Thompson, one of the ranch hands who had helped repair Serena's roof that first day, now watching Charlotte with unmistakable admiration. "Your sister seems to be making an impression," Serena observed. Grant followed her gaze and chuckled. "Poor Luke doesn't stand a chance against Charlotte's charm. She'll be breaking hearts all across Wyoming before she returns east." "You think she will return?" Serena asked. "Eventually. Charlotte has her own path to forge, her own battles with convention to fight." Grant's expression grew thoughtful. "But something tells me we haven't seen the last of her in these parts." As the celebration continued into evening, with lanterns lit and a fiddle producing lively music for dancing, Serena looked around at the homestead, transformed not just by the wedding decorations, but by the months of shared labor, the gradual rebuilding of both the physical property and her place in the community. The cabin, now expanded with the addition Grant and the ranch hands had constructed, stood ready to become a true home for their married life. The fields beyond, cleared and prepared for crops, promised prosperity with proper tending. Even the old barn had been reinforced and expanded to accommodate additional livestock. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, returning to her side after speaking with some of the ranch hands. "About how much has changed since last summer," Serena replied. "When you first spoke to me outside Hamilton's store," Grant smiled at the memory. "Best decision I ever made, introducing myself to the stubbornly independent woman everyone else was avoiding." "I was so certain you'd eventually believe the gossip," Serena admitted. "That you'd regret involving yourself with me. And I was certain you were exactly who I'd been looking for, though I didn't know it until I found you." Grant took her hand, his expression growing serious. "When I saw how you held your head high despite everything, how you refused to surrender your father's land or your own dignity, I knew then." "Knew what?" Serena asked. "That you were rejected for your past," Grant said softly, echoing words he'd spoken months earlier. And I wanted nothing more than to build you a future. As twilight deepened into night, the celebration gradually wound down. Guests departed with final congratulations. Charlotte retired to the small room that had become hers during her stay, and at last, Serena and Grant were alone in their new home as husband and wife. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xavier," Grant said, closing the door behind the last departing guests. "I've been thinking," Serena replied, removing the wildflowers from her hair. "Perhaps we should call it the Palmer Xavier Homestead, to honor both our contributions." Grant's smile was warm with approval. "I like that, a blending of our histories as we create our future." As she prepared for her first night as Grant's wife, Serena reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment, from outcast to beloved, from solitary struggle to shared purpose. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but standing now on the threshold of their life together, she knew with certainty that every difficult step had led precisely where she was meant to be. 5 years later, 1881, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the Palmer Xavier homestead as Serena watched from the wide porch of what was now a substantial farmhouse. In the yard, 3-year-old Henry chased butterflies while his father pretended to help but mostly just supervised with evident adoration. At Serena's feet, baby Margaret cooed in her cradle, reaching tiny hands toward the colorful quilt that was her current fascination. "Papa, look." Henry called, pointing excitedly toward the road where a wagon was approaching. Grant scooped up his son, settling him on broad shoulders for a better view. "Looks like Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Luke are early," he observed, walking toward the house. "I told her noon," Serena said, rising to prepare for their guests. "Should have known she'd ignore that completely. When has Charlotte ever done the expected thing?" Grant laughed, depositing Henry on the porch. "That's why we love her." Charlotte's quarterly visits from the neighboring county, where she and Luke had established their own ranch after their wedding 2 years prior, were always cause for celebration. The spirited young woman who had come west for her brother's wedding had never returned east except to collect her inheritance upon turning 25, much to her father's dismay and her mother's secret delight. As the wagon drew closer, Serena could see Charlotte's unmistakable figure driving the team, with Luke beside her and their 1-year-old daughter secure between them. "The whole Thompson Xavier clan," Grant observed with a smile, "and right on time for the Founders' Day preparations." Sweetwater's annual Founders' Day celebration had grown significantly in recent years, coinciding with the town's expansion thanks to the railroad spur completed in 1879. Serena, once excluded from community events, now served on the planning committee alongside Mrs. Wilson, who had become one of her strongest supporters and dearest friends. The transformation in her standing had come gradually, first through Grant's unwavering support, then through her own quiet perseverance and contributions to community needs. When influenza swept through Sweetwater during the harsh winter of '78, Serena had opened their home to 3 orphan children, caring for them until relatives could be located. When drought threatened crops the following summer, the irrigation techniques Grant had implemented on their property became a model for neighboring farms. Respect, Serena had learned, could be rebuilt on foundations of consistent character and genuine service. Not everyone had changed their opinion. Some of Sweetwater's oldest residents still sniffed disapprovingly when she entered a room, but they were increasingly in the minority. "There's my favorite nephew," Charlotte called as she brought the wagon to a halt. She handed the reins to Luke and practically leaped down, rushing to scoop up Henry, who squealed in delight at his aunt's exuberance. Greetings and embraces were exchanged all around, with particular attention to the babies, who were deemed to have grown impossibly since their last meeting. As the men went to care for the horses and unload Charlotte and Luke's belongings, the women settled on the porch with lemonade and the children. "So," Charlotte said, bouncing her daughter on her knee, "how are preparations for the big celebration?" "Luke says there's talk of a proper dance this year with musicians coming from Cheyenne. The committee has been working for months," Serena confirmed. It's to be the biggest Founders' Day yet, with the 5th anniversary of the railroad's arrival. And you're still handling the baking competition? Charlotte asked. Serena nodded. Along with Mrs. Wilson, though this year I'm actually entering as well as organizing. About time, Charlotte declared. Your apple pie should have been winning blue ribbons for years. It didn't seem right before when some people were still. Serena let the thought trail off, unwilling to dwell on past hurts. Charlotte's expression softened. And now it feels right, Serena said simply. Sweetwater's become truly home again, in a way I didn't think possible after everything that happened. The sound of a rider approaching interrupted their conversation. Both women looked up to see a smartly dressed man on a fine horse coming up the drive. Serena recognized him immediately as Theodore Bennett, the railroad company's regional manager who had recently relocated to Sweetwater. "Mrs. Xavier," he called, doffing his hat politely, "forgive the intrusion. I was hoping to speak with your husband about a business proposition." Serena rose to greet him. "Mr. Bennett, Grant's in the barn with my brother-in-law. I'll fetch him for you." "No need to trouble yourself. I'll find him," Bennett replied, dismounting smoothly. "And please consider my invitation for you both to dine with me and Mrs. Bennett before the Founders' Day celebration. She's most eager to make your acquaintance." After Bennett disappeared toward the barn, Charlotte raised an eyebrow. The railroad manager making personal calls and dinner invitations. Something significant must be afoot. Serena smiled thoughtfully. "Grant's been consulting on some expansion plans. The railroad's considering a livestock shipping facility here, which would save ranchers the long drive to Cheyenne." "That would transform Sweetwater," Charlotte observed, "and benefit your operations considerably." "It would benefit everyone," Serena corrected. "Easier shipping means more prosperity for all the local ranches and farms." Charlotte studied her sister-in-law with open admiration. "You always think of the broader good." "That's why this town eventually had to acknowledge your value, whether they wanted to or not." When the men emerged from the barn with Bennett, deep in conversation, Serena watched her husband with quiet pride. His knowledge of the region's agricultural potential, combined with his Eastern education and Western practicality, had made him increasingly valuable to Sweetwater's development. The once outsider ranch foreman had become an influential voice in the territory's future. After Bennett departed with promises of further discussions, the family gathered for the midday meal in the spacious dining room that had been part of last year's addition to the house. The table, crafted by Grant's own hands from local pine, easily accommodated the extended family. As they shared news and plans, Serena found herself momentarily overwhelmed by the fullness of her life. From the darkest period of rejection and isolation, she had emerged into this: a loving marriage, beautiful children, renewed community connections, and purposeful work both on their prospering homestead and within Sweetwater itself. That evening, after their guests had settled into the guest rooms and the children were asleep, Serena and Grant sat on the porch swing, watching as stars appeared in the deepening twilight. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, her head leaned against him in the easy intimacy of 5 years' marriage. Bennett's proposal could mean significant changes, Grant said, breaking their companionable silence. "Not just for Sweetwater, but for us personally. The shipping facility." Serena asked. "That and more. He suggested I consider a position with the railroad overseeing agricultural development throughout the territory." Grant's voice held both excitement and hesitation. "It would mean travel, responsibilities beyond our own operations. But also the chance to implement your ideas on a larger scale," Serena observed. "To help other small ranchers and farmers establish themselves as we have." Grant pressed a kiss to her temple. "You understand me so well. Still, I wouldn't consider it without your full support." "Our family comes first." Serena turned to face him in the gathering darkness. "Grant Xavier, when have I ever held you back from something that mattered? We built this life together, and will continue building it, whether that means expanding our own operations or helping others develop theirs." "You're remarkable," Grant said softly. When I think of that proud, wounded woman I met outside Hamilton's store, already remarkable then, though she didn't know it. I was surviving, Serena replied. You taught me to live again, to believe in possibilities beyond mere endurance. Grant's hand found hers, fingers intertwining as they had countless times over their years together. Do you remember what I said to you during that first winter storm, when you worried about what people would think of our relationship? You said you weren't asking despite my past, but because of it, Serena recalled, because it showed my character. I meant every word, Grant affirmed. Your strength in facing rejection, in refusing to compromise your integrity even when it cost you everything. That's the foundation our life together is built on. Serena leaned forward to kiss him gently. We've both come so far from who we were when we met, both rejected for standing by our principles, both finding our way to something better than we could have imagined alone. As night fully descended over the Palmer Xavier homestead, lights glowed warmly from the windows of the home they had built together. In the nursery, their children slept peacefully, secure in the legacy of love and integrity their parents were creating. In the guest rooms, family members who had chosen to follow their own unconventional paths rested before tomorrow's continued celebrations. And on the porch, Serena and Grant remained wrapped in each other's embrace, grateful for the past that had shaped them, content in the present they shared, and hopeful for the future they continued to build one day, one decision, one act of love at a time. In the distance, the lights of an expanding Sweetwater twinkled like earthbound stars, the town that had once rejected Serena now intimately connected to the life she and Grant had created. It was not perfect, nothing human ever is, but it was rich with meaning, purpose, and the deepest kind of love, the kind that sees clearly, chooses freely, and builds faithfully through all seasons. She was rejected for her past, Grant had said that day on the plateau when he proposed. Then I'll build you a future. And so they had, together not just for themselves, but for their children, their community, and all who might learn from their story that true character ultimately matters more than reputation. And that love, when genuine, has the power to build new worlds from the ashes of the old.